Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Michaela, and I'm here to talk about the best of fanfiction that I read last year. A couple of things to note before we get into this. I am only going to be talking about finished fics, with maybe a couple of caveats in there. That is mostly just because it was easiest for me to go through the fics that I have finished. Every time I finish a fic, I bookmark it on AO3, so it was really easy for me to go through my bookmarks from the last year and see which fics were there. That isn't to say that I don't read ongoing fics, or that the fics that are on hiatus slash still in limbo aren't great, and that I didn't love them. I definitely do read them all the time, and I'm still going to be talking about them at some point, but it's easiest for me to go through those bookmarks, so that's where I went to pull all of these fics for you guys. I keep saying and then never doing like more regular fanfiction content, and that might be a better place for me to talk about the ongoing fics that I'm reading every single month, but when it comes to like a year in review, I'm just going to be talking about the finished fics that I read. Not all of them were finished last year. Some of them definitely were. Some of them are older titles that I just happened to read last year. It's just based on what was bookmarked between December 31st and January 1st of 2025. The other thing that might be worth noting is that because this is usually a book channel and I'm normally reviewing books, I'm not going to be talking about these in the same way that I talk about books. So while I am a critical reviewer, this is more of a recommendation video. I am not going to be talking about any of the negative aspects of this, because this is somebody's hobby, right? It's something that's put out into the fandom for free for me to enjoy. It doesn't make sense for me to critique it or rate it in any way. All of the fics that I'm going to talk about today, I really enjoyed. There might be grammatical errors or whatever else is going on in there. Not my business. These are free, fun things that I enjoyed that I think that you might enjoy as well. If you didn't know, you can kind of see them up there in the background from behind me. 99% of the fics that I read are Steddie from the Stranger Things fandom. If you're stumbling across this, I've titled it that way. There is one exception to that in this list, and I'll talk about it when I get to it. But if you have been in the fandom like me since season 4 came out, welcome. Let me talk about some fics. You might have heard of them, you might not have. Hopefully you find something that you enjoy. If you are coming back to the fandom after having wandered away a little bit when the hype of season 4 died down and now we just had season 5, hi, welcome back. There might be some fics that you didn't know about that you can learn about now. Or if you're new to the fandom, because I have seen some new folks enter the fandom with season 5, hi, welcome. Happy to have you. Here are some fics that you might enjoy. If you are none of those things and you haven't ever read a Steddie fanfic before, this might also be a good video for you, because I'm going to be talking about some of the best, at least in my opinion, that I read in the last year. So definitely a worthwhile video to look at if that's something that you want to try. All of these were entertaining and just good reads that might be worthwhile. If any of the things that I talk about today sounds interesting to you, I have put a link in the description to a Google Sheets spreadsheet that has all of the fics listed with their links, titles, authors, their sort of like main trope tag to make it a little bit easier to find them, and you can go straight there, find the fic that you want to read, click it, open it, read it from there. I felt like that would be easier than listing 30 plus fics in my description that you have to try and sort through. It was just a little bit more organized there for you to look at, and hopefully that makes it easy if you want to read all of them. If not, you know, you could do the good old-fashioned AO3 search. I'm going to be showing the tags and the title and all of that stuff on the video as I talk about each of them, so you can screenshot if you prefer. And the very last piece of, like, before we get into the nitty-gritty and I talk about all of these, is the way that I'm going to organize this video. Because this is like a year in review, I have 30 plus a couple more fics to talk about today. I have chunked them into sort of larger groups of like common types of fics that you might be interested in that get a little bit weirder as you go down the line. So if something isn't interesting to you, you can skip ahead and skip that type of fic. I do recommend all of them and I read all of them, but you know, I get it if it's not for you. I'm going to start with what I'm calling Fix-It fics, which are the fics that are mostly focused on the very end of season 4 and trying to figure out how to survive slash save Eddie slash defeat Vecna before season 5 came out, because most of these came out before season 5. The second set of fics are what I'm going to be calling post-canon fics. These are ones where we're just going to kind of like hand wave away the fact that Eddie died. He's going to be alive. It takes place after canon. They're generally canon compliant, although there might be some in there that are ignoring certain bits of canon, but they're usually still set around the 80s, 90s, that sort of time frame, following the same characters after the events of up through season 4. The third type of fic I'm calling Canon Rewrite. These are going to take place at some point during the canon. They might be season 2, season 3, in between seasons, whatever it is. They're rewriting sort of the events of what happened in the canon of the show. And then you get into the more AU side of things. I have a big chunk of modern AU stuff. That's very common. I have a bunch of fantasy or monster related stuff. This is where your like Cass Eddie fics are gonna be, but it could also be witches or mermaids or anything like that. It's gonna be in my fantasy section. And then the very last section is other AU. It's just something weird mixing two different IPs, things like that are all going to land in that last bucket. And then at the very end, I have an honorable mention that I wanted to talk about, but those are going to be my main chunks of sections with like 4 to 6 fics in each section. With all that out of the way, let's get into it because I'm sure this video is very long. I mean, you clicked on it, you saw the timestamp. If you need to, put me in 2 times speed in the background and do something else while I'm talking and just enjoy. I hope you find something that you like. I love the fandom. It's what kept me mostly sane for the last several years. I have never left. I've just been living here for years. This is my house. Welcome to it. Let me show you all of my nice things. We are going to start with my Fix It fix, which encompasses a couple of different things, but all of them generally are we're going to fix the events of the end of season 4. Starting with, I finally read A Tarnished Copper Boy by Paperback Ribs. This is a popular fic in the fandom, so you may have heard it already. I don't know why I was dragging my feet so much on it. This is in the popular subgenre of time travel fics in some way. This one involves Steve when he goes through the portal back into the right side up at the end of season 4. There's some sort of weird blip and it actually throws him back into the past, into Eddie's trailer, before the events of season 2, I believe. I believe season 1 already happened, but it's before the events of season 2. He winds up sticking around with Eddie, but blipping in and out of time at various points, and we get to see how that change and the way that he changes the timeline affects the story as it goes forward. It's a long form fic. I loved it. Highly recommend. The next fic I want to talk about is Eidolon by Stervrucht. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a fic that the canon events of season 4 has happened, but Steve volunteers to help Dr. Brenner, who somehow survived season 4, with an experiment where he is taking some drugs, going into a machine, and that allows him to go into the past, or so he thinks, to talk with Eddie, to see what's going on. I don't want to talk about much more about what's going on there. That's sort of the base of what you need to know for the fic. I read this one as it was coming out, every single chapter. It's mysterious, it's lovely. It is sad and a little bit stressful, a little bit hurt comfort, and very slow burn, see how things go as they go, but I think that it is well worth the read. One of my favorites of the year for sure. Like, I still think about it today. The next fic I wanted to recommend is Static by In the Overlap. This takes place right at the end of season 4. Steve and Eddie end up getting trapped in the Upside Down as the gates are closing. Nancy, Robin, and Dustin make it through the portal, but Steve stays behind to care for Eddie. There is a lot of like wound healing, hiding from monsters in the Upside Down, and then there are chapters interspersed with the folks on the right side up trying to get back into the Upside Down to rescue them, hoping that they have still survived up until that point. So you get to a bunch of different POVs, you get the slow burn of them slowly falling in love while they try and survive together. Again, I really loved it. This one needs way more hits. I feel like it didn't get as many views as it deserves. It was such a good time and such a good canon Fix It fic. Another staple of the Steddie fandom, we have a time loop Fix It. This is Same As It Ever Was by Quokka Foxtrot. I super enjoyed this one. I feel like I always enjoy a good time loop fic. So if you've been feeling like you've missed the like early days when we got a great chunk of those, this one's definitely in the same vein. I loved it. Highly recommend. Steve just going through a time loop over and over again of the last day before Eddie dies. It has all of the tropes that you were expecting there of them trying to fix different things. One of the things I really enjoyed about this one is that there is a point where Steve kind of gives up and doesn't want to be a part of it anymore because it's so overwhelming and painful to him. And I think that that's something that doesn't get brought up a lot in these, where you get to sort of see several loops in a row where Steve is checked out and not doing anything. So yeah, if you've been looking for a time loop fic, highly recommend this one. Same as it ever was. The next one on my list is Overwintering by Pyro the Dragon. This one needs like a million more views. The writing on this one was fantastic. It was so unique. We follow Steve as he is the one of the only people left living in Hawkins, where it's more or less just become a wasteland. Everyone has been moved away. Wayne also lives nearby, but he's just outside of the area of Hawkins. But Steve stays here to more or less fight the handful of demo creatures that sometimes make it back out through the rifts after the events of season 4. But it has more or less just been quarantined and left to rot. There is a group of weird cranes that show up and are kind of following Steve around that unnerve him a little bit, and the way that this is used to bring Eddie back from the dead is so unique. Such a good story. Highly recommend this one. And again, on like a writing level, blew me away. I loved the writing on this one. Now we are moving into my post-canon fic, so we're just kind of hand-waving away that Eddie lives for some reason. He got saved, we don't know. And this is just taking place some point after season 4, and maybe even season 5. Unrelated. The first one in this is Didn't Mean to Say I Love You by Stars Don't Sleep. At some point, Eddie is drunk, and he confesses that he's gay and in love to Steve. Steve's fine with this, but Eddie, upon finding out that he did this, has so much anxiety around it and is treating Steve very differently to how he did before that, which bothers Steve because Eddie's one of his best friends and he wants him to be comfortable around him and not to hold back. And slowly over the course of the fic, he finds out that maybe he's interested in Eddie in trying to get the same level of closeness that he used to have. So yeah, it's just kind of everyday life, some queer panic struggles, a good time. I love this one. It was very sweet and very cute and a lot of hurt comfort. So yeah, I read it as it was coming out. It was lovely. Highly recommend it. The next fic on my list is Stay Right Here, Let the Cosmos Twirl by Gay Jinkies. This is one where Eddie isn't involved in the upside down stuff, and that's the only change that happens. Steve is doing night drives where he can't sleep, so he just drives around and checks on everyone. And as he's driving, he comes across Eddie's van broken down on the side of the road, and he can't leave Eddie on his own at night next to the woods because of his anxiety and him knowing that monsters exist, but Eddie not knowing that. So he decides to help Eddie. Eddie refuses that help, and it follows the two of them as they come to an agreement or come to know each other, as Eddie's being bristly and Steve's just trying to help. And eventually this does get explicit towards the end of the fic. It was very cute. I enjoyed it. The dialogue in this one, A+. A+ dialogue going on, so highly recommend. The next fic on this list is Keep It Warm, The Place by Your Side by Lightbringer. The tag that I put this under is, and they were roommates, because it involves Eddie and Steve being roommates post all of the canon events. Steve has a migraine and Eddie takes care of him. There are some BDSM themes in like a soft dom sort of way in this one, so if that's interesting to you, I highly recommend it. It's a short one-shot. Just cute. All of us like a good migraine Steve getting taken care of, so this is in that genre. This next one is for all of you fake dating fans. It's called Alibi by Faye Faye Faye. Dustin comes to Steve and tells him that Eddie's in trouble. He lost his job at the grocery store because someone exposed themselves to, I believe it was Chrissy in this one. Steve knows that Eddie didn't do it because he was buying drugs from Eddie at the time, but he doesn't want to get caught buying drugs. He feels like that's horrible from his father, so he decides to say, actually, we were dating and he was with me, because that is a better thing to do in the 80s, is say, I'm gay. Drugs? No. Gay? Fine. I love Steve's thinking here. It was such a fun time. If that's something that's interesting to you, get to watch them fake a date to sell the lie and to get Eddie out of it, and Steve to find out that maybe this wasn't a lie the whole time. Maybe he actually just wanted to date Eddie, and this was a good reason to do it. Another hurt comfort fic for the folks who are fans of that. It's Leading Me On Every Time We Touch by Mazzy Star. This one is a touch-starved Eddie fic where post season 4, he's jumpy and twitchy and he doesn't want anybody to touch him because sensation post the bats is horrible for him, but he finds out that Steve is someone who can touch him without it hurting, and they begin cuddling and he gets his touch-starved stuff from that. Again, some slight BDSM stuff in like soft dom ways, taking care of somebody ways, and Eddie does some subspace just from being cuddled because it just makes him feel so good. So if that's a problem for you, maybe not this one, but I loved it. Highly recommend it. I love a good hurt comfort. I love when they're sad and they get to make each other feel better, and heal a little bit. So highly recommend this one if that sounds like something worth reading to you. The last fic in this category is Edge of 27 by Inspector Jones. This one follows an Eddie who has become a rock star in the future, but he's burning out. He runs away from all of the things that he's been doing, and folks call Steve to find Eddie. He winds up finding Eddie at the quarry. There's discussions of suicidal ideation in this one, so if that's not something that you're prepared to handle, that's there. But we get Steve who's able to talk Eddie down from things and basically help him through some struggles where he realized that this dream that he's been chasing his whole life maybe isn't what he wanted, or at least he's not living it the way that he wants to live it. So yeah, if that sounds interesting to you or worthwhile to you, highly recommend Edge of 27. It was great. I loved it. But again, I'm a big hurt comfort person, so this is like my category. That's why there were so many in this one. On to the category of like canon rewrite. This is going to encapsulate any of the fics that take place during canon at some point previously to season 4. I'm going to start with Boy with the Knife by Fei Fei Fei. Obviously super popular in the fandom. I loved it. This one, you may note, is showing 33 out of 35 chapters because as I was pulling this together, Faye decided to add on some epilogue stuff. It was marked as complete when I added it. It's still complete with the main story, but there's more bonus content coming out right now. So if you want to jump on the bandwagon, there will be some new stuff coming out for you in the near future, it looks like. But this follows a post-season 2 Steve where he comes back to school and Billy Hargrove decides to spread the rumor that the reason he beat up Steve was that Steve is gay. So he gets outed forcibly to the whole school. It does have elements of Steve and Eddie were friends at some point when they were younger, but they grew apart. But Steve getting kind of exiled and treated this way for being queer by the school gives Eddie a reason to step up and try and be his friend once again. So if you like that, that's here. It has head over heels Eddie, who's like, I will kill anyone who touches my precious sweet cinnamon bun Steve. Love that aspect of like a mildly unhinged, dangerous Eddie, but he's also the softest, sweetest man when it comes to Steve. So if that like dynamic is something that you really like, highly recommend this one. And again, yeah, it's popular in the fandom this past year for a reason. It was great. I loved it. My next recommendation is actually a series. The series is called Crockpot Love by Peak to the Ocean. This involves a bunch of different fics, but the main fic is Steve getting kicked out before the events of season 1 and running away to live with his queer relatives. He goes to live with his trans uncle and his trans uncle's wife, who live above a like queer literature bookstore. And then eventually Eddie and Robin will stumble across Steve in the LGBTQ neighborhood that he's living in. And they basically say that Steve was assumed dead or kidnapped or murdered, because his parents didn't talk about why Steve disappeared. They basically treated him like a runaway when really he was kicked out. So there's a little bit of hurt comfort. There's some original characters that I super loved. I'm not usually a big OC person, but adding in Steve's family members here, loved it. Giving him a very different background, loved it. And you get to see sort of what happens when you grow up in a accepting queer community versus the more uptight, rigid community of like small town Hawkins in the 1980s. I super loved it. Highly recommend it. Handing it to you guys to read and enjoy as well. Another series rewrite here with Accomplice of All Things by Cloud Surfing. This is Steve was actually one of the kids at the lab, and that lab kid doesn't actually look like Steve does. He has a power that lets him touch somebody and sort of take over their body or their mind. He comes across the body of Steve Harrington, who had just passed away from hypothermia in the woods, takes over that body and decides to assume the life of Steve Harrington. What happened to the lad kid's original body? No idea. Doesn't matter. There's some magic and things. He eventually comes in with Eddie, and they will do some things with his powers that's interesting, where they like mind meld, hive mind with each other. But if you're looking for a Steve was a lab kid person, this is a great story. I highly loved it. I feel like I haven't read very many in this genre, so if you have recommendations for me, if this is something that you love, please leave them down below, because I think this is one of the first that I've read of like Steve or Eddie are actually lab kids, or were one of the kids at the lab fics. So give it a shot if it sounds interesting to you, and give me more if you have them. The last fic in this category is I'll Keep the King by Kiki Does Fanfic. This is another post-season 2. Steve's fallen off the social ladder. At this point, all of Hellfire decides to adopt Steve, and he starts playing D&D with them, and grows attached to all of them. The writing of the Corroded Coffin Boys in this, I loved. Highly recommend. I need more fics with them in it, because I always love when Eddie gets to have his friends outside of the party as well. And I feel like there was great dialogue and characterization in here. It was super fun. There was a lot of funny laughs, things going on. And I always love a Steve drops so far down the social ladder that he's just like, you know what? F it, I'm gonna do what I want, and here he is playing D&D with the boys. It was such a good time. I super loved it. So if that sounds interesting to you, please pick this one up. We are now moving into the realm of all of the AUs, starting with modern AUs, because I feel like those are like the most realistic, where it's like pretty normal. Starting with Swing and a Miss by Dead on Arrival. This is a baseball AU where Steve is bringing Eddie along to spring training. He finds out that he's really only allowed to bring a WAG, a wife and girlfriend, so they decide to fake date so that Eddie can get all of the perks of being with someone who is a professional baseball player. If you are Gretchen, you might not want to read this. I like made a joke and sent it to her and was like, please tell me everything wrong about the baseball in this fic. It's kind of hand waved away. It's not super detailed, but it was very cute. Eddie POV, which I feel like I read way more Steve POVs than I read Eddie POVs, but Eddie coming to terms with the fact that maybe Steve didn't want to fake date, but he didn't know how to propose dating without really selling it first and seeing if Eddie liked the lifestyle. So they slow burn fall in love over the course of this fic, and it was just a good time of Eddie panicking because he has to learn about baseball and like be supportive and make all of these women think that he's been dating Steve for a very long time when really they've just been really close friends. But yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, fake dating definitely, I know, is a popular trope. This one was a great one for me. Keeping in the same vein, I'm going to recommend Junk Journal by VIP July. This one also has baseball player Steve in it, but it's less focused on that. Eddie is addicted to this ASMR channel that does junk journaling, where you like take stickers and pieces of paper and all of this stuff, but the person only really shows their hands. The gender of the person is unknown, and Steve is the person who runs that ASMR channel, so they start to connect over that, and eventually fall in love. I loved it. It also has Rockstar, Corroded Coffin, Eddie, so we have both of them being famous in some aspect, and connecting over crafts and using the internet for craft stuff. So highly recommend that one if that sounds interesting to you. Junk Journal by VIP July. I loved it. This one is criminally underread. Please go read it. Criminally underread. I just saw the hits out of the corner of my eye. Oh my god. Following the trend of like social media being a thing, new season Boring AF by King Dom Bell. This one follows an Eddie who likes to send like all of his favorite memes and stuff to the Instagram account for Steve Harrington, the famous actor, because he's thinking that Steve is never going to open those or look at them, because obviously he's a famous actor. He doesn't actually use his social media. It's just a great place to get together all of those memes and jokes and things he wants to send his friends later. They rag on him for that, because why would you do that and not just save it to your camera roll? Don't know. Eddie's just a weirdo. But then at some point, Steve responds back to one of the memes that are sent, and they begin corresponding and dating that way. I liked this one. I think it feeds the little person inside everybody's brains who's like, I could fall in love with this famous person someday. Will that ever happen to any of us? Probably not. But it lives in that same space of like, here's this dream that we could have. Highly recommend this one. It was super funny and cute and really quick. So just a quick little read if you want something bite-sized. Bit of a weird one and a little tiny one. Steve's Daycare for Big Kids by Fucticles. They are someone from Tumblr that I like to read a lot of their stuff. They have really unique little fics and stories that they do very often over there. This one made it over to AO3. It looks like it's where Steve runs an age regression daycare where a bunch of the adult characters in Stranger Things come to basically pretend that they're in daycare again. So if you're not a kink person, definitely not for you. Not that this is an explicit one. Most of the people who go there just want to like drink juice boxes and eat apple slices and play with blocks and things and turn their brain off for a little while. But I know that for some folks that's weird and they wouldn't enjoy it, and I totally get it. If it's not for you, it's not for you. I enjoyed this exploration of kink in a non-sexual way, even though there is also some sexual stuff with the relationship between Eddie and Steve in particular. The majority of the discussion here was the ways that people are able to interact with their inner child in a healthy way, in a kinky way that is non-sexual. So if you want to see an example of that, that's here. And again, really short, little cute, little fic, little idea. I think that we need to have more of this, because I do think that Steve would be great at this. If we're doing like soft dom, caretaker dom Steve, have him run an adult daycare for age regressing folks. I think it would be more interesting than people have yet to play with. So yeah, definitely an interesting one. We've finally reached the one fic in this entire list that is not Steddie, and it is Starb, or Steve Harrington and Barbara Holland. ASMR You For Real by Formosus Iniquus has trans feminine Stevie Harrington, who runs an ASMR channel that famous author Barbara Holland likes to listen to. She goes back to her high school reunion and comes across Stevie Harrington, recognizes her from the ASMR channel, doesn't necessarily recognize that that is the King of Hawkentine, Steve Harrington, in the future. So very interesting. I have read several, and I love a trans Steve with Barb fic. So if you have recommendations for me for that category as well, would love to read more. I just enjoy a trans Stevie. I don't think I've had many recommendations of that on the list, but trans Stevie and Barb in a queer relationship, love. Give me more of those. And this one was my favorite of the ones that I read this year. So ASMR You For Real was fun. I enjoyed it, and it did break me out of just reading Steve and Eddie for a little while, and let me read some other stuff. So there we go. The next fic on this list is The Edges of Your Soul I Haven't Seen Yet by Italia Gold. This is a fic with autistic Steve, which I really enjoyed. Eddie is helping his uncle at the farmer's market, the local farmer's market. His uncle grows a lot of vegetables. There's some new folks across the way that do baked goods, a young man and woman who happened to be Steve and Robin. He comes across Steve having a autistic meltdown because of some things that were happening around the farmer's market, and he takes care of Steve. They build a relationship as he gets to know each other, and yeah, I really loved it. It's very soft, very sweet. Farmer's market AU, I guess, but a modern AU where you get to see realistic autism representation and just the softest, sweetest Eddie taking care of this beautiful boy who just gets a little overwhelmed sometimes. Now we get to go into the fantasy category. This is another large category for me because I love me some weird magical fantasy stuff going on. Starting with Who Shall Sing Me into Death Sleep by Teddy Westworrell. This is one of the most interestingly written fics that I read all year. If you haven't read this one, please pick it up. Again, criminally underrated fic. As far as writing is going, it is from a third-person omniscient outsider perspective, where it is written from the perspective of like an eldritch god, like old world god that is watching a witch Eddie that Eddie is a patron of this god, and Steve, who is the son of like a berserker clan, comes to Eddie's village to take it over as he tries to get out of needing to take over his tribe in general. Again, the writing on this one, fantastic, astounding, amazed me. Some people are so talented. It is so unique. It is explicit, so if that's something weird to you, it does also have like gender fuckery when it comes to Eddie, because Steve is expecting a female witch and gets Eddie, so if that's something that intrigues you, that's there as well. This is another one where like if you are not a fan fiction person, I think that you could read this and love it, like as it is, like astounding quality on this one. The next fic on this list is The Mermaid That Ate My Best Friend's Boyfriend by Harrington. This is an Into the Drowning Deep AU, so if you, like me, love Into the Drowning Deep by Shannon Maguire, horror with mermaids, spooky horror mermaids, this one I would recommend to you. Steve is the spooky horror mermaid. In this case, he goes through a weird portal and winds up at the bottom of Lover's Lake. He witnesses Jason attempting to hurt Eddie, kill Eddie, question mark. He was tied up and was going to throw him in the lake, so probably kill him, and decides to eat Jason instead. This leads to Eddie going back and trying to help the smur creature that technically saved him, and they will eventually fall in love. This is for my monster fucker friends, because this is definitely one of them. Highly recommend it if you enjoy that. It's an interesting one. I'm not going to talk much more about the plot. I think that's enough to get you hooked. Highly recommend. Loved it. The next fic on my list is Scream in the Name of a Foreigner's God by Murder Trash Baby Rat and Rajamat. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. We have another eldritch horror monster fuckery fic. Eddie is an eldritch god in this one, and Steve is the sacrifice the town is making to him. He learns that he can be murdered or have sex with him and live with him for a year are the three options. He chooses the latter two. He says, I could do both. We could do both. And then gets whisked away to the lair that Eddie lives in, and eventually finds out that he's actually been chained to this society to do this from another god, and Steve and some of the other folks that have lived in the area that Eddie lives in all decide to come together to try and free Eddie from needing to be stuck in this cycle. Highly recommend this one. Again, definitely monster fuckery, so if you are not interested in tentacles and weird things going on, maybe not for you, but if that sounds like your jam, I recommend it. It was a good one. Another series to recommend now, which is the Alive and Kicking series by Gay Handshake. This is a bunch of like shorter fics that all have to do with Cass Eddie, where Cass is a parasite creature or some sort of thing. It has Steve and Eddie dating before the events of season 4, and then Eddie getting taken over by this parasite, and Steve interacting with what looks like and sounds like his boyfriend, but isn't his boyfriend, and what happens there, and what they do with Cass when they eventually do take him out of Eddie, because he gets to get put somewhere else, and I think it's hilarious. So if that sounds interesting to you, they're short, quick reads. Highly recommend. It's an interesting take on Cass Eddie, where he's not just like transformed on his own, but there is also like a separate entity that is Cass. I recommend it. Another series for you, if that's something that you enjoy. This is the Hellfire book series by Scoozy Pants. This is a couple of different fics that all tie into like a world where magic is real. Steve is a magic user, but from all of the trauma that he has had from the events of Stranger Things, it has made it so that anytime he uses his magic, it is physically painful to him and may be causing harm to his body. He is struggling with that, and is looking for some sort of job, and gets hired at a metaphysical bookstore that Eddie and the rest of the Hellfire Boys run. The two of them eventually will fall in love over the course of this. It does start with them sort of being antagonistic towards each other, or perhaps I should say Eddie being a little bit prickly when it comes to Steve, because he thinks Steve will act or be a certain way, even though that's not how Steve is at all throughout the course of this. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, it was very interesting, very unique, them falling in love over the course of this, and you knowing things about Steve that Eddie doesn't know when he's interacting with Steve. Also, love me some good irony in that case. So, yeah, I super enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. If you like a little bit of magical realism, like mostly real with a touch of magic, this might be something worth trying out. The next fic on this list, and the last one in the like magical monster AU category, is The Cut Makes the Coat by Brain Babs. We have Selkie Steve in this. If you haven't heard of Selkies before, they are a mythological creature where they turn into a seal with a coat, but if their coat gets taken by someone, they're basically trapped with that person forever until they get their coat back. And Steve keeps trying to give his coat to Eddie and leaving it with Eddie to get them to stay together. And Eddie keeps finding this coat that's not his, and he knows it's Steve, and he keeps trying to give it back. But the more and more this happens, the more he wants to keep it. So it's like reverse Selkie trapping Eddie. It was such a fun time. It's just a silly concept, and a different take on the like mermaid fic, because we get Selkies in this one. Slow burn in that it takes quite a few chapters for them to actually get together, because Steve is not willing to like have a normal conversation, and he keeps trying to backdoor himself into a relationship with Eddie, and Eddie's just like trying to be a good person. So yeah, if that sounds interesting or cute to you, highly recommend it. I loved it. It was a good one. And we are in the last full category of my junk drawer fics, the ones that are just random AUs. They're all here. It's going to be a bunch of very different things, but all worth reading in my opinion, starting with the Steddie Love Name fics. This is a series of some pretty short one-shots that falls under the category of soulmate identifying marks. It isn't necessarily soulmate in the way that there's like one person that is yours forever, but more so in that as you fall in love with someone, their name gets written on your skin, and the more you fall in love with them, the colors change, and there's more rules, like you can't lie to them and things like that will happen over the course of these fics. Both Steve and Eddie during this get each other's names, but they don't know how to tell each other because they aren't actually dating. They're just friends who have fallen in love with each other, who are trying to figure out what's going on between the two of them. And as they figure out that, oh, actually they have each other's names and they've just been silly the whole time, it's just a really interesting idea. It was very cute. I loved it. I love a soulmate identifying mark fic. It's my absolute favorite. I think I have read every single one in the Steddie fandom. So yeah, highly recommend this one. I loved it. It was such an interesting play on that idea. The next series is A Man After Midnight, which is a professional dom Eddie fic. This is technically a future fic, but it is a BDSM AU, so I put it in this category because it is very much centered around BDSM more so than just being like a normal future fic. It has Steve and Tommy in a relationship that is BDSM, but it's rough and it's not a good representation of that. Steve is a sub who needs more than Tommy is willing to give, or give safely, so Tommy allows him to find a professional dom to do what Steve needs in order to feel healthy and safe. Eddie is a trans man who is a professional dom, and he's the one that Steve eventually goes to. This is a long series. There's a bunch of works in this. All of them are great. They have great OCs that I love. They have characters in all sorts of different dynamics and relationships and kinks. And I think like all of the like older teens have some sort of kink dynamic going on somewhere in here. I think one of my favorite parts of this is that Robin has a podcast that she does that is kink related, and at the end of every single episode of the podcast she will talk about the thing that she loved about Steve that week. Those are great. Highly recommend this if you haven't read it. I feel like it definitely needs more reads. So I loved it. If you're a BDSM person and you like that, highly recommend this. Even if you're not, it might be interesting to read this one because I feel like it has like a very healthy discussion around kink and the different ways that you can do it, the different types of dynamics that exist out there, and also obviously super queer. Loved it. A+. This fic might be personally shot at me. It's called Of Paper Stars and Pudding Cups by Same Ship, Different Font. If you didn't know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is my absolute favorite book of all time, and I'm calling this a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest AU because of the majority of it takes place inside of a sanitarium. Eddie gets put in there after ODing because of being on suicide watch, essentially, and he is struggling to come to terms with the fact that his OD actually was an attempt. He seems to think it was just an accident, or is trying to come across as it was just being an accident. So he doesn't feel like he should be in there, but he should. He needs to get the help that he's trying to do. Slowly, he eventually gets to know Steve, who is living on the ward, and seems to have a very different lifestyle to the other people who are there. Like, this seems to be his home. He has a much cushier room with like a rug and clothes, and he's allowed to have cardigans. Steve is suffering from a traumatic brain injury, and also I think is written in a way that he was autistic before that happened, and the brain injury has made all of his autistic traits not worse, but his ability to function around them worse, perhaps. So the two of them fall in love, and it's eventually going to be Eddie trying to get Steve out of the sanatorium because he doesn't need to be in there. He's not that bad, but his family doesn't want to deal with him, essentially. So if you want a bunch of discussions on mental health, triggers for some of those, but I absolutely loved it. It was amazing. And again, it has a good amount of hits, but criminally underread for how well written this one is. The next recommendation, another series. This is the Bloom Cycle series by Scalaris. This is a Batman AU where Steve is Poison Ivy and Eddie is Harley Quinn. So if you want that is here. I am not a big like mixing IP person usually, at least like different fantastical things like that. Like, I wasn't a big like Spider-Man Steve person when that was popular in the fandom, but I did love this. Again, the writing on this is top tier, top notch, something that like really blew me away for what it is. Following an Eddie who is a powder keg constantly causing problems, and Steve who just sort of wants to be left alone with his plants. There's some outsider POVs where Steve's plants talk about the way that their relationship unfolds and how they feel about Eddie being in the greenhouse with them. I loved this one. Highly recommend it. Robin is Robin, which I think is great. And a good like anti-hero Steve and Eddie. Like, they're not 100% good, but they're also not 100% bad, which I think is very interesting for their characters. A lot of times people want to make them heroes, but I think viewing them as anti-heroes or reformed villains is actually very interesting. So I highly recommend it. If that sounds interesting to you, give it a shot. I like, just again, the writing on this one knocked it out of the park. And my last recommendation in this section is again, a series, God, How Lucky Can a Simple Man Be by Italia Gold. I read through all of these. I think I have it listed as like Cowboy AU. That's not 100% correct. It is like cowboy in that they're riding horses. But the main fic in this involves Steve, who works at a ranch on a program where inmates will come and try and train wild Mustangs into being horses that can be used for the ranchers in the area as rehabilitation, both for the horses and for the inmates. Eddie is an inmate that comes into the program. We have a Steve that is really struggling. He's an alcoholic. He's living on his own. He's still struggling to get over his ex Nancy and everything that's going on there, as well as an Eddie who lacks all confidence, who is in a situation where he feels extremely guilty for the reasons that he is put into jail, which have to do with his dad and the things that his dad was doing that ended up causing someone to die. It's clear that a lot of people blame him for the death, even though he wasn't the one to do it. And actually, the reason he got caught was that he was trying to save the man, who unfortunately didn't survive. So there's a lot of like emotional angst going on in this one, but it is also so sweet. There are more fics later that you get to see the life that they have after all of that emotional turmoil that happened in that original fic. So Italia Gold is one of the authors that I'll read just about anything that they write. This was one of the standouts of the year. And if you haven't read it, highly recommend it. A+, I loved it. It's definitely one that I think I will reread and return to. And then I wanted to do a shout out to Steddie as _ she goes, because there is also Steddie as she goes, all one word, over here. They do microfics almost every single day, and it's really hard for the microfics that I read to wind up on this list just because of how short they are. It's like very rare for them to like stick and hold in my mind like long enough or have enough like in them for me to talk about in a video like this. But I start my day most days, I feel like, with a microfic from Steddie as she goes. Not every single day, but like a lot. I have a fic from them. So if you are a person that just wants to have like a bite-sized pick-me-up, highly recommend subscribing to Steddie as she goes, because just like it's just a great way for me to start my day. Anytime I wake up and have an email from AO3 with a new microfic from Steddie as she goes, I'm excited. So there's just over 500 works in there for you to browse. They're all over the place, different AUs, different scenes, different things. There's probably something for you in there. Highly recommend this author, and I wanted to shout them out because, again, I feel like it's really hard for like the microfic authors to wind up on one of these lists just because of the fact that they're so short. But they do great work and are important to the community and the fandom. So here you go. Here's a recommended if you are a microfic person. And with that, we have come to the end of my collection of fics that I really loved this year. I have no idea how long this was. I'm sure it was way too long. Hopefully you found something in there that was worth reading that you haven't read. If you have any recommendations for me, please leave them down below. I would love to read them because, like I said, I live here. This is my house. This is what I do. I spend so much time reading Steddie fanfic, and it's just something that I care about and I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to give all of these authors recommendations. If you want more timely recommendations from me, follow me on Blue Sky, because when I read something that I really love, I have a tendency to skeet it out over there. And also I have a whole bunch of Steddie friends over on Blue Sky that I talk to, and it's such a good community over there. I love it. But you can find me there with my links on Pied Piper calls everywhere. If you want to follow me on AO3, all of my bookmarks are public, but look at me. If you do that, you're not allowed to judge me. You can go look at them. They're all there. No judgment. Look. we're both at the devil's sacrament. Like, I don't know what you're asking of me. I hope that you enjoyed, you found something lovely, and I will talk to you guys again soon, probably about books next time, but who knows? Not me. This is all chaos.